good evening. This is Hound Dog Steve coming to you on the 7th of December. And what I'd like to discuss this evening is the riots that are taking place in France right now. They're spreading right through the country. They started off in Paris. They're calling it the Yellow Vest movement, but this is really a very cautionary tale for any government that wants to go down the same path that France has. President Emmanuel Macron took over a couple of years ago, and it's turning out that he really is from a banking background, and certainly the people of France think that he is really representing the elite and the bankers and not the people, and he's become kind of dictatorial in his ways of late, and he's imposed a carbon tax on gasoline, and this has sparked riots from rural French people. And of course, this is quite often the case with elites. They live in the cities, and also the other residents of cities are not quite so hard hit by this gas tax and unemployment issues, because they can take public transit if they want to. Unemployment is not so high in the inner city. There always seems to be something to do, but in the rural France has been really hit hard with unemployment. Farmers use a lot of oil in gas and fuel for their tractors, but also in pesticides and fertilizers that are quite often based in oil. And not only that, the few people who do have jobs in rural areas tend to have to drive to get there. And so anyway, this Yellow Vest revolution is called such because people have to carry yellow vests in their vehicles at all times in case they're involved in an accident, emergency situation and whatever, so it makes them highly visible. And anyway, Macron's popularity in the polls has absolutely plummeted down to 18%. He has basically repealed all of these taxes now, but it's too little too late, and they're calling for his removal, and they're calling for increases to minimum wage, and also to address the unemployment issues in the rural areas. Now, this sounds awfully like America. Middle America was ignored by the Democratic presidencies, and these people lost their jobs, they lost hope, and that anger spilled over at election time. Minimum wage, here in Canada, minimum wage has been actually raised up to $14 now, but they're not going to increase it anymore. But just to give you an example, if minimum wage had kept pace with inflation, it would be $32 an hour Canadian now. Okay, so that shows you how far separated we are from reality. And you see again the elites, and we're doing the same thing in Canada. We're playing number games to pretend that inflation is somewhere between 1.5 and 2.5%. But anybody who is living in the real world knows that the real things that you have to buy have gone up by more like 5 and 6%. And they're calling on increase in groceries next year, especially greens like fruits and vegetables, by 3 to 4%. That's a significant increase. And I suspect it's going to be more than that, because the weather we've been having has really been hard on crop production around the world. Okay, so these are recipes for revolution. And not only that, France has become completely burdened with the immigrant and refugee situation. They have had immigrants in France for so long, in Paris. There are whole areas, whole sections that are nothing but a particular religion, and there's a lot of discontent in there. It's very hard to find work. I think unemployment is somewhere around about 25 or 30%. And of course, this has been a source of great issue of late. And of course, somebody has to deal with all this stuff. Somebody has to pay these migrants, somebody has to house them, somebody has to find jobs for them in a high unemployment situation. And so this makes things very tenuous. And this one issue, this carbon tax, has just pushed it into overdrive. And why is it a cautionary tale? For Canada especially, because we're going down this path. We haven't quite got here yet, but they're getting ready to impose a carbon tax. Inflation has been eating away at everybody's incomes for a long, long time now. Pensions have not kept up with the cost of living. Nothing has kept up with the cost of living because the numbers people, the elites up in Ottawa there, have been playing numbers games and jiggery pokery and trying to pretend that because the figures say something is so, that, well, it must be so, and, well, I guess you're really all right, but, because you're only dealing with 2% inflation. Well, we can all see what's going on because we actually have to lead that life. We're living in that real world. And so, yes, I think our leaders should be paying attention to this quite strongly. Canada is about to sign a UN immigration pact which would basically allow unlimited migration, and it would even prevent criticism. Anybody who wants to criticize that. But there's been no explanation as to who is going to fund this, where these jobs are going to come from. We have our own homeless, we have our own unemployed in Canada, and we can't deal with them. How on earth are we going to deal with an excessive number of migrants coming into the country? And this is not an anti-migrant sentiment. I just believe that if you let somebody into your country and you don't have the resources to offer them meaningful work, a roof over their head, then you're not doing the migrants any favours either. You're just making life more miserable for everybody involved. Anyway, those are my thoughts on that kind of stuff. And I say that as an immigrant myself. I came to Canada legally. I emigrated from England, and I've been here for 37 years, and this is my home. Okay. So anyways, where I'm leading with all of this is these pressures are building up, and when you play this let them eat cake game and only pay lip service to the real troubles and follow lofty ideals, which are all very nice, but lofty ideals do not put bread and butter on the table, and they don't put gas in your car. And so anyway, in France, they are bracing for more riots this weekend, and they are saying that this is going to be the worst riots ever. Paris has basically shut down its whole centre. The Champs-Élysées is going to be closed down. The museums are closing. But gasoline has spiked to $7.50 a gallon. Now in Canadian terms, that's $1.66, $1.67 a litre. Okay, and that's what they're talking about in Canada with the carbon tax. We are going to $1.67, $1.75, somewhere in there, a litre, to cover the extra expense. Okay, well, let me go over to the slides here, and then when we come back, I'll just round this up and say cheerio. Here we go. Okay, so here we go. This is Reuters. Fearing Act 4 of unrest, France to close Eiffel Tower, Louvre at weekend. Paris. France will close the Eiffel Tower and other tourism landmarks in Paris and draft in thousands more security forces on Saturday to stave off another wave of violent protests in the country over living costs. With protesters from the Yellow Vest movement calling on social media for Act 4, a fourth weekend of protest, Prime Minister Edouard Philippe said 89,000 police nationwide will be deployed to stop a repeat of last Saturday's mayhem across France. And I can tell you, when they riot in France, they know how to riot. Will you look at this? Unbelievable. As well as increased police numbers, 12 armoured vehicles belonging to the gendarmerie will be used the first time in a French city since 2005, when riots broke out in the capital suburbs. This is from Slate. France's latest protests are a rejection of all things Macron. There you go, anti-Macron. On Tuesday, French Prime Minister Edouard Philippe announced that the diesel fuel tax that kicked off the Yellow Vest movement will be suspended, a sign of how seriously the escalating unrest has rattled the administration of President Emmanuel Macron. Don't expect the Yellow Vests to stand down now. What began as an automobile-focused cost-of-living protest undertaken by a coalition of the white rural working class and petit bourgeois has evolved into a hydra-headed autumn of discontent with many objectives, no leaders, and a base that encompasses a cross-section of French life from engineers to paramedics to Parisian high school students. The other problem with this too is that, because it says here that the well-meaning Gilets jaunes, or yellow vest, has been joined by riotous elements looking to make trouble. What is certainly true is that the Gilets jaunes were only one element of the unlikely weekend coalition, and that included, among many other groups, ambulance crews, activists protesting the deaths of Adam Trezor, Antifa, and the anti-immigrant far right. Unlike the capital's frequent labour-organised marches, Saturday's events had few experienced marchers and little internal organisation. And of course, this is from the Telegraph. This is an absolute disgrace. French school children held on their knees by police during Paris protests. Footage showing the brutal arrest of high school students protesting outside Paris is causing a stir ahead of further anti-government protests this weekend. The footage, which has been shared widely on social media, has prompted trade unions and far-left parties to lash out at perceived police brutality. The images, which were filmed Thursday at Mantes-la-Jolie, showed a group of students on their knees with their hands behind their heads. They are being watched by armed police officers whose faces are hidden by ski masks. Now, this is exactly the sort of thing that gets riots going. When you start strong-arming children like this is like prison detainees. Yep, you are going to have riots on your hands. Anyway, I'll be covering this on the weekend because I am going to be very interested to see how all of this plays out. And as I say, this is a cautionary tale. Well, I hope that you can see what a terrible situation it is in France, and we definitely do not want to duplicate it. So I'm hoping that our leaders will stop acting like elitists and forgetting who the grassroots people are in this country, the backbone of this country, who are trying to survive under increasingly adversarial conditions in the economy, and inflation, galloping inflation. Okay, these are all recipes for unrest. Okay, well, please, I hope you'll comment on this because I would love to hear your opinion. And if you like this, please like and subscribe below. Click that big red button. It really helps when you do. And we'll be talking to you real soon. Take care now. See ya. Bye.